Everyone, and welcome to the Daily Signal's Top 10, and today we're counting down the top news stories of the week, many of which have gone either misreported or underreported in the mainstream media. Jared's out traveling on the West Coast. I'm Ginny Malsavano, so because of that, here today to help us break all of this down is our editor-in-chief of the Daily Signal, Rob Bluey. Rob, thanks for being on with us this week.
Thanks, Ginny. It's great to be with everyone.
Well, as usual, we have a lot to unpack, so we're going to jump right in. At number 10, we welcome home 3 North Korean prisoners that President Trump secured their release. Watch this.
Say this is a special night for these 3 really great people, and congratulations on being in this country. Thank you.
This is obviously a huge win for the Trump administration and ahead of his summit in June with the North Korean dictator. What did you make of this?
Well, certainly, Ginny. I mean, this is one of those stories where remarkable in so many ways that the Trump administration was able to do this. I think on the one hand, Mike Pompeo has only been the Secretary of State for a matter of weeks.
Right.
And look at what he's already accomplished in that short period of time. And secondly, everyone doubted President Trump when it came to foreign policy. They said he was going to be a disaster, and the fact that he has made more progress in just about a year and a half than President Obama and other presidents before him have been able to make. With that said, let's be, trust but verify. We need to still be skeptical of the North Koreans.
Right. President Trump has had quite a week in terms of foreign policy, and we're going to dive into that more. But now number 9, so NBC said that Trump greeting the prisoners was a staged production. Check this out.
Listen, Donald Trump's a former reality show producer. This was a staged production meant for television, meant for the cameras, meant to be shown and seen here in this country and around the world.
So unfortunately, I wasn't very surprised by this. No. Even the New York Times said Mike Pompeo is missing, and I loved when Trump came off the plane. He was like, Mike, did you know you were missing? I mean, of course, he made a spectacle of it.
Yes.
It's not surprising, though.
It's not surprising that the media would do this. I mean, so, first of all, look at the source. They're going to nitpick and try to find any fault that they can in anything. And I think that the fact that the president, did this in the wee hours of the morning probably irritated some of the networks. Yes. Nobody wants to be working that late. I know I was sleeping, so I don't know about you.
I was. And he announced that Pompeo was on his way over there after he finished talking about the Iran deal. So,
that's right. They happened basically back to back.
Yes.
So, I mean, you had this major announcement on Iran, and then virtually the next day you had what was transpiring with North Korea. So, yeah, if they think he did it purely for the ratings or the entertainment value, I mean, I think it just goes to show you how shallow some people in the media are.
I agree with you completely. And speaking of the media, as usual, Sarah Huckabee Sanders had some lively press conferences. Watch her against the press this week.
Thanks, Sarah. The president today on Twitter suggested stripping journalists of their press credentials. Is that a line that, as press secretary, you would be willing to cross?
I'm standing up in front of you right now, taking your questions. I think a number of you have mentioned both off-air or on-air, in private, and a number of other occasions that this is one of the most accessible White Houses. We're very committed to a free press, and I think that we demonstrate that every single day, not only by me being up here and taking your questions as I'm doing right now. The president did it just a couple of hours ago and has made multiple sets of remarks and will be in front of the press later
So
today.
as usual, she holds her own. You've had a long, great career in communications and journalism. What did you make about President Trump kind of contemplating, should we take the credentials? And then Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying, hold on a second, everyone.
Well, first of all, another example of the press overreacting to a tweet. So Trump is obviously frustrated about some things that have happened in the news, particularly the story from the New York Times about Pompeo going AWOL. I think that really set him off in a way where he's going to make a comment about the fake news. And he has every right to do so and critique the press. The press does not like it, and they always overreact. But let me tell you one thing about this that I find quite ironic. Here you have journalists sitting in that White House press room, colleagues sitting on Capitol Hill. The Daily Signal does not have press credentials for Capitol Hill. They've told us pretty explicitly that we can't get those press credentials. Want to know why? Because the same journalists who are complaining about President Trump's behavior are on the boards that control who gets those credentials. So it's a very insular group that they're already working with. We're very fortunate to have Fred Lucas in that room at the White House. And that's because the White House does credentialing differently than Capitol Hill. And so those journalists should look at themselves.
I agree, and good on them, and congrats to Fred. He's done some wonderful reporting for us. So speaking of foreign policy wins for this Trump administration, President Trump ended the Iran deal earlier this week. Watch this.
The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. in just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapon.
So this was something that President Trump made a huge deal about during the campaign. This was a campaign promise, and it certainly took Mike Pompeo coming in, you could argue, as Secretary of State, because they were on the same page. And a lot of people see this as a win, but naturally the left is very upset.
Oh, the left, and I think some of the European allies have also obviously spoken out in opposition to this. Two countries that supported President Trump on this, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu immediately came out and made some very complimentary comments, in Saudi Arabia. And I think, like, as President Trump said, Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. They're doing some awful things. The fact that the United States was subject to this deal and it was not yielding the kind of results that we wanted, I think, let's face it, it was time to take some decisive action.
And that's what he did. President Trump said, the era of empty threats and broken promises is over, and this was another example.
Certainly.
Number 6, Melania Trump, as usual, is criticized for her new Be Best initiative. Check this out.
Too many critical issues facing children today. So the 3 main pillars of Be Best will include well-being, social media use, and opioid abuse.
As usual, Melania Trump can't do anything right when it comes to the mainstream media, it seems. She has really kind of come into the public more, especially since the state dinner that she hosted for France. This initiative has been long awaited. She had a great rollout, and ironically, her approval ratings are up to 57%. They've jumped massively since January. She seems like a huge asset for the administration.
Yeah, our colleague Kelsey Harkness covered this on the Problematic Women show, and I think it just goes to show, I mean, a day before, I think it was just a day before, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders referred to this, a day before Melania Trump came out with this initiative, the Washington Post has a front page story saying that basically her and the president are leading different lives and she's not in the White House and doing all this thing. And it's doing everything they can to undermine her as she tries to launch this. Can you imagine them doing something like that with Michelle Obama? They would never happen.
No, they would never get away with it. But she's an easy target. And it's not just Melania. They do it to Kellyanne Conway, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It's unfortunately a common practice, but props to Melania for a great rollout.
Yeah, and we wish her well in this initiative, and thank you for covering
of course,
it.
I can't wait to keep following it. All right, number 5, Gina Hasspel is up for nomination for CIA director, but she's facing a tough double standard. Watch this.
Was John Brennan a member of the Senior Intelligence Service and the Deputy Executive Director at the time a senior manager, in your opinion?
Senator, I believe Mr. Brennan was the deputy exter of the agency at that time.
And you'd consider that a senior manager position at the CIA?
I believe it's a number 4 position.
For John Brennan, who was confirmed to be the CIA director by the following members of this committee: Senator Warner, Senator Feinstein, Senator Heinrich, Senator Collins, Senator King, Senator Burr, Senator Manchin, Senator Wyden, and Senator Rubio.
Clearly, there is a double standard, especially considering that many of the Democrats who are so vocally opposed to her right now confirmed John Brennan, who was her boss at one point. And I think I've been reading a lot about this, and there are certainly discussions that we can have about the morality of torture and whatnot. But this seems very clear-cut that in terms of this nomination, there is a massive double standard.
Well, there's no doubt, I think even for those people who criticize her, that she has the experience necessary to lead the CIA. Now, there's been one Republican, John McCain, who, as we all know, when he was a prisoner of war, endured some terrible time in his life with torture. So he obviously comes from an experience. But I think she made clear in her testimony this week that that is not the CIA that she would lead. You're right. She is a very qualified person. And it's one of those things where you've had Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, come out and endorse her. You had Evan Bayh, the former Democratic senator from Indiana. So there are some people who I think are still reasonable. But you're right, Ginny. Clearly a double standard in many cases.
We'll keep an eye on that closely. Number 4, Kim Kardashian has entered the political ring on prison reform, and Alice Johnson, who is a 62-year-old great-grandmother, she's serving a life sentence without parole for a first-time nonviolent drug offense. Watch this.
I've been in communication with the White House and trying to bring her case to the president's desk and figure out how we can get her out. Jared Kushner, who I've spoke to, has been really working on some criminal justice reform bills, and I would love to sit and talk to them, and I know they're internally talking about it. So, I mean, that's such a huge step from where we started with, you know, that not even being on their radar. So far, the White House has been really receptive to my calls, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm not going to stop that because people personally don't like Trump.
So first Kanye, now Kim. Kim
Yes.
has been pretty involved with prison reform, and she's spoken with Jared Kushner. This was put in his wheelhouse, and Jared Kushner actually this week was supposed to go down to Texas and tour some prisons with Senator John Cornyn. What do you make about Kim's appeal on this?
Well, look, I think anytime you have a celebrity who wants to get involved in a policy debate, it's encouraging. I mean, we've had many testify on Capitol Hill before. You regularly see them in Washington. There are issues that they care passionately about, and this is clearly one that she does. I think on the policy front, that was really encouraging this week to see some action on Capitol Hill in the U.S. House. The prison reform bill moved out of committee. It's an issue that our colleagues here at the Heritage Foundation, John Malcolm, has worked on for a number of years. So Ginny, I mean, what's your take? I mean, here you have a celebrity who's lending her voice to it.
I think it's a great example of lending your voice in a positive way. I mean, I think everybody can agree on both sides of the aisle that Alice's story is heartbreaking and that there's some work that could be done in terms of policies. We'll have to keep an eye on it.
Certainly.
Now on to number 3. This has just been exploding. It's the This Is America song and music video that Childish Gambino, aka Donald Glover, has put out. Watch this.
Contraband. I got the plug on who a hawker. Whoa. They gonna find you like blah.
So I've watched the music video a couple times, and we would love to hear what you all think about the video and his message. There's definitely a lot of ways to look at this.
Yes.
What's your opinion?
Well, first of all, let's start by saying this is one of those things where they say, when they use the phrase like break the internet.
Yes, it broke the internet.
It broke the internet. It was so viral and so popular. Obviously, he hosted Saturday Night Live, so he's going to be making a big splash as a young Lando Calrissian in the new Solo movie that's coming out later this month. So Donald Glover, definitely a cultural icon who's having an impact. You know, I'm no music critic, and I'll leave that to the experts who are, but I would say, again, just like Kim Kardashian, I think it's really encouraging that it's prompted such a debate about, you know, our culture and what it is to be a Black American, and the interactions they have with police, and some of the you know, violence that we see in major cities. I mean, there are real discussions that need to take place, and I think that's one of the things that can, you know, come out of this in a positive way.
Yeah, I think anytime you can raise and start a huge conversation, even if you don't necessarily agree with how it was started, I think it's always valuable. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that.
And look, I think that this is one of those cases where I would really like to know what our Daily Signal viewers think about this, wouldn't you?
I would. Please let us know. All right, number 2, President Trump praised Turning Point USA's Candace Owens earlier this week on Twitter, and our own Rob Bluey, you were ahead of the curve and did a fantastic interview with her in March at the White House Generation Next Forum. Watch this.
I think President Trump represents the first opportunity for Black Americans to get off of what I refer to as the ideological slave ship. To step outside of this lie and this myth and this illusion, and to understand that we've had our power essentially stripped from us, and we continue to allow that by being afraid of racism, which is no longer an actual threat in this society. Black Americans.
Her popularity has clearly exploded. Now it's kind of like she's a household name. Now you had the chance to sit down with her. I know our viewers loved her. What was your experience?
Yeah, no, it was one of those things where it was not an interview that we had planned to do that day. We're obviously at the White House at this big event that they were doing with millennials, and Candace came by and offered to talk, and it was a great interview. And it's something that I think she's saying things kind of like Kanye, and Kanye is the one who really, I think, exposed her to a wider audience when he tweeted about her. And she's doing things by challenging the status quo. And she's saying that Black Americans are actually better off under Donald Trump than they have been in the past. And so I think that it's a message that people who haven't particularly been paying attention to this, now you have a messenger out there who's taking a lot of abuse, let's face it.
Yes.
Probably not a lot of friendly people on Twitter, but in a way, it's great, again, as we've talked about in the last couple of items, to see somebody out there having the courage to speak about it.
She's definitely breaking through the noise, and if you want to see Rob's interview with her, you can go to dailysignal.com. All right, last but not least, we're honoring our mothers. Speaker Paul Ryan sat down with the Heritage Foundation's president, Kay Coles-James, earlier this week and discussed his mother with her.
When my dad died, I was 16 years old. My mom had to go back to school, got on a bus every day to Madison, Wisconsin, had to go back to school to get a skill so she could start a small business to work. And the example that I saw my mom pursuing an education after, you know, she and I were at home with my Alzheimer's grandmother, that was a great example to me. The work ethic my mom displayed, the courage she displayed, and then to start a small business. Just to make a life for herself and for us. That to me was so inspiring.
If you'd like to see the full video, we'll link to it below. It was a great 20-minute interview,
Yes.
and he had a lot to say about his mother, who, you know, when Paul Ryan was 16 years old, he found his father dead from a heart attack. So he talked about how his mother had to go back to school so that she could start a business and provide for the family. What did you think about his remarks?
Well, it was certainly an inspiring story. It's obviously something that had really shaped Paul Ryan and throughout his career, no doubt about that. And I think as we look at some of the challenges that families in this country face, you know, I think the message he was trying to get across there is that you really can't give up. I mean, you have to, for so many reasons, strive to succeed. He talked about the opportunity society that he hopes to create. And I think that's one of the great things about mothers and fathers. I mean, but as we look to Mother's Day, Ginny, I wanted to know if you had a particular thing about your mom that you wanted to share, how she shaped your life.
She has just been incredible. I wouldn't even know where to start, but I really appreciate everything she's done. And I'm missing Mother's Day this year, but I'm going back for Memorial Day, so we'll make up for it then. But how about you? Are you guys doing anything fun to celebrate?
Yeah, so you know, I've got two small kids, so we'll be celebrating Mother's Day with my wife and wish my own mother a happy Mother's Day. We spent time together last weekend, and you know, it's one of those things where I think let's all take a moment to step back and just really appreciate those people who've made a special difference in our lives. So
I agree.
Thank you to all the moms out there who are watching.
Thank you, and happy Mother's Day. And thank you all for joining us this week. Rob, thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. Have a great weekend.